Hello there everyone and welcome to the Python training. So you are about to be a Python expert. So what would be the first step? Yes, of course, we are going to learn about the variables, the functions, the methods, the looping, the tuples, list, and pretty much everything. But before we start everything out there, what we should take care about that is what is actually the correct way to start learning the Python. Now, many times you will see that people will just fire up their terminal or maybe a command prompt, and just what they will be doing is, let me put up this onto the center, hit a couple of times a plus key to increase the font, and what they'll be doing is simply hitting the Python, and they can type out something like this, and they can simply say print hello or something like that. Now, of course, this is a fastest way, a great way to test out a couple of lines. But are we aware of those couple of lines? Not at all. So this method, although it's a great method, but this method is not at all suitable for the beginners. If you are a beginner, you do not want to go along with this method. Now, if you are quite aware with the Python and you just want to test out a couple of lines, whether they work or not, or the logic is correct or not, then this is a great way. So what would be a great way for us? Now let me just hit it, click on the close, and the great way would be simply just clicking on this module 1, which is just a simple Python project, and having a /usr bin python and interpreter being set that we have already talked. Now what we want to do is click on this icon and click on the file. You can also do this by going on to the main menu, click on the new file, new, and click on the file. Just open that up. Now we have selected module 1 because we want to click and we want to create our new file inside the module 1. Now the very first thing that anyone want to learn is identifier. Now I'll talk about the identifiers in a moment, but here is the important thing that you should take care, that make sure that there is an extension of .py. It is super important. I cannot lay more stress out here, but it is super important to make sure that your file is having an extension of .py. Now let's hit the finish, and here we go. The first thing is out here is actually blank. Nothing is out here, and you might see first of all quite a lot something like this. There might be a path like such as /usr /bin, make a slash, make a bin, and then a Python. It is really a common path. Now why we put out there? Now because you will realize eventually that Windows is not actually a great platform, although you will not be hurdle anything inside this entire series. You can run this series onto a Linux, onto a Mac, or onto a Windows. But the true power, or we can say the most common usage of Python, is inside a Mac or maybe a Linux. And this is the default path where your script actually first of all tries to search out for the interpreter. Now this is not at all always the path. There can be another, there can be /usr bin, there can be env/python. This is again a common path, but in this case, in our case, it is going to be simply the Python. Now this is okay, it won't hurt much, and we will talk about how this works and all of these things later on in the movie. But right now, what should be your focus? Your focus should be on the naming convention. Now let me put up in this a very simple example that, let's say you are a dad now and you want to name your child. Now what will you name it? Now some of you will say that I'll name my child as a John, some say I'll name it as Sham, or some will say I'll name him as a George. So names are different for every country. Now what my goal behind that is, when we name out anything in the Python, maybe it's a variable, it may be a function, it may be a private variable, or it may be anything. There are some convention that you always need to follow. Now first of all, if I simply say a is equals to 1 and hit enter, that's perfectly fine, and that is perfectly wrong as well. You should not be focusing anything on A, B, X, Y, and all of this. This is not at all a good practice while learning out. Eventually, naming out your variable as A, B, C is really cumbersome, and you do not want to do that. Instead, try to name out something like this. If you want to simply have to like this, name it as a high score. Although doesn't really matter, but it gives you a great naming convention that we should always be focusing in naming our variable as a sensible thing. So can I name it anything? Can I name it something like that? I can simply put it as 1 high score. No, you are not allowed to do that. So what are the rules that we always need to take care? And eventually you can see that Eclipse is again complaining, hey, you are not allowed to do so. So let me get rid of this and give you a simple example what kinds of names are allowed. So for this you can put simply like any comments. So for the comments I'll be using a pound sign. You may call this as a hash sign. So the first and the foremost rule is you can have capital A to capital Z. Foremost a great rule, but here is the problem. Whenever you name your variables or anything into all caps, they mean something different. They can be meant as a constant or maybe some special kind. So another option is out there for you. You simply want to name them as A to Z, that is all small. But you can notice I haven't done this in my high score variable. So again, you are allowed to have a combination of that. So I can simply say that you are allowed to have combinations of all A to Z. Now again, not only the combination, you are allowed to have numbers. You can have 0 to 9 as numbers as well. But when we put it down, all the numbers behind our high score, or you can simply say we prefixed it with the high score, it was not at all allowed. So what was the problem? Now let me just say that and make sure you hear it correctly. Now make sure that you always put numbers after the variable or the characters, or simply A to Z. Now you are simply allowed to have something like this, high score 1. That is not going to complain, but one high score is going to complain. So let me quickly remind you what are the rules. Now always make sure that identifiers. Now first of all, what is this identifier? We haven't talked about that. Now identifier simply means a naming convention. You want to name your functions, you want to name your classes, variables, modules, objects, pretty much anything. So you should understand what are the naming convention, and whatever the name, it should always starts with a capital A to Z or maybe small a to Z. Also, you are allowed to have underscore. You are also allowed to have letters. You are also allowed to have digits and all of that. But starting an identifier with a simple uppercase or maybe lowercase is always a good practice. And I would always recommend to start with a lowercase or something like that. Now, here is one more convention that you are allowed. You can also make sure that you can put underscore behind your letters. Now, it is not at all convention or simply saying ideal thing that we always like to do, but sometimes we like to do this. And starting an identifier with a single leading underscore indicates that the identifier is a private. And what the term private means, it is only accessible by a certain group of people. In this case, I would be really vague, but that would be okay. Now you are also allowed to have double underscore, but this comes as a caution. Now starting an identifier with two leading underscore indicates a strongly private identifier. By the term strongly identifier, I can simply say that this might be a reserved keyword. Now you can see in the suggestion I have got underscore init underscore. Make sure that you see that correctly. These are two underscore. You will also see there are two underscore main and two underscore function variable being available, but we will talk about that later. In the Python, we do not need a main function, although you are allowed to do so. You can make entry point, but let that talk be a later point of time. Let's not go into deep of that. Now, one more important thing that you should be aware of that. And for that, I need again a bizarre example. That is, I need to call back our A guy. So if I say A is equals to 1, that is perfectly allowed to have. But right now you can see it's complaining, but it goes off. You'll see that quite a lot because momentarily with the time, it scans your code and makes intelligent decision based on that. Now again, I'll call one more bizarre example. A is equals to 1. Now Python is strongly typed and case sensitive in this case. And what does that mean? It simply means that when you define two identifier and you have a case sensitivity between them, this means they both are two different things. And if I simply say a is equals to 2 and I simply want to print a, the small one, it is going to print as 1. And if I want to print a as caps A, it is going to simply say as 2. So make sure that you keep in mind that these are two different things, and Python is a case sensitive language. So if I say later on in my code something like this, I have a high score and I simply say is equals to 2. So obviously those two high scores are pretty much common, and it is a pretty common mistake that is being done by quite a lot of programmers. Make sure that you are aware how you name your variable. Now, here is my gentle advice to all of you, or you can simply say a tip for all of you. Now, this high score is a great example of naming your variable. Always start them with the lowercase and make sure every subsequent word starts with a uppercase. And in programming terminology, we call them as a camel case. A simple hump of the camel is between every letter. Now, you can also see there can be a combination of letter, and again, we will follow the same convention. Every subsequent word will have a hump, or simply saying first letter will be caps. So you can see this is really simple. Now there are some other convention as well, like how we declare our classes, how we declare our variables, but we'll talk them on the later point of view. Right now it is only important that you make sure that all of your variables are having sensible names. That is the most important part that you can take from this lecture.